Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever had that moment? You know, the one right after you've reacted in a way you immediately regret.
Oh, yeah.
A sharp word slips out, maybe a craving just takes over, or you just shut down completely when you really, really wished you'd spoken up.
Hmm.
And then comes that familiar ache, that internal groan of, why did I do that? I know better. I mean, it's an incredibly common human experience.
Absolutely. That feeling that somehow, despite your best intentions,
Yeah.
you got derailed.
Exactly. It's the moment the dust settles, or sometimes even before it settles, and you're just looking at the wreckage. Maybe it's external in a relationship or just internal, the shame and confusion you feel.
And you honestly wonder what force possessed you. Because the
Yes.
person who woke up this morning, the person with like good intentions,
Hmm.
that wasn't the person who just acted out.
That disconnect is profound. Well, we're diving deep today into a book that was apparently born precisely from that kind of ache, but also from a much deeper realization and a significant frustration.
Yeah, the book is called The Buddha's Lost Art of Gaam-Node Ru and the Three Natures.
And it sets out to tackle that exact question. Why did I do that? But it does so by suggesting the answer isn't what most of us usually think.
Right. It's not just a lack of willpower, apparently, or a certain character flaw showing up, or even just being stressed. The book points to something much more fundamental, something operating, beneath the surface of our day-to-day awareness.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we're focusing specifically on the foundational ideas, the ones presented in the preface in chapter 1 of the book.
Hmm. These sections really set the stage. They paint the picture of the problem the book aims to solve, and they introduce the core concept that, well, that offers a way out, supposedly.
So we're going to unpack the roots of that why did I do that question and explore what the book suggests is truly happening inside us, the stuff that drives these often baffling, regretted actions.
It's a perspective shift, really. The book offers a different way of looking at our inner lives, one that challenges common ideas about personal control, especially in those, reactive moments.
And importantly, it addresses why traditional approaches to self-awareness or change might sometimes fall short.
Exactly. Leaving us feeling like, well, like failures, honestly.
Okay, so let's dive right into the preface then. The book opens by expanding on that feeling of regret we talked about, and it introduces this idea of an unseen burden, something most people carry.
Yeah, it describes it as something you don't even realize is there, like a weight you're hauling around, until, as the book puts it, something breaks.
Right. The book starts by acknowledging that feeling of being weighed down, even if you can't quite name it. It's like a low-grade hum of tension or pressure you've gotten so used to, you barely notice it's there.
You manage, you function, you get through the day.
Hmm.
But this burden, this unseen weight, the book suggests it makes you brittle.
Brittle. How so?
Well, it means that when life pushes, or sometimes even when it doesn't push that hard, that's when something inside just snaps.
And what does that breaking look like? The book gives examples, doesn't it? The kind we all know.
Exactly. It's that sharp, unnecessary word that just flies out. It's suddenly giving in to a craving you were determined to resist just an hour ago. It's freezing up in a meeting when you knew exactly what to say, but just couldn't get the words out.
Right. The action itself might be different each time, but the aftermath feels the same.
Always the same. That internal collapse, the guilt, the confusion, and that familiar ache of, I know better, why did I just do that? The book frames this as the consequence of carrying that unseen weight without knowing how to put it down, or even knowing you're carrying it.
Okay, and this leads directly to the book's central and maybe most challenging realization. We are unknowingly driven by hidden forces. This feels like a significant turn from, conventional thinking.
This is absolutely key. The book isn't talking about external forces like societal pressures, though those exist. It's talking about internal ones
Inside us.
inside us.
Yeah.
And the critical insight is that these forces are incredibly subtle, incredibly clever. They don't like announce themselves with flashing lights or anything.
So they hide.
They
Okay.
disguise themselves. And this is the really crucial part.
And they disguise themselves as what?
As us,
It has
as our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own impulses, even our own brilliant ideas sometimes. The book makes this powerful assertion that most of us live our entire lives completely mistaking these forces for our authentic selves.
Wow. Okay. So I hear a thought, I feel an emotion, and I automatically assume that's me thinking, that's me feeling.
Right, but the book suggests these are often the voices, or maybe better, the energies of these distinct internal forces operating through us. not as us, but through us.
So you have a sudden urge to say something cutting or a powerful pull towards, I don't know, watching another hour of TV instead of working.
Hmm.
And you experience it as your urge, your decision, your laziness or whatever. But the book is saying, hang on, that might not be you at all.
That's the suggestion.
Uh,
It could be one of these hidden forces driving that impulse.
and if you don't know they exist, if you don't recognize their presence and how they operate,
You have no way to differentiate. You're essentially attributing their actions, their agenda, to your own core self.
hmm,
And that leads to so much confusion, so much self-blame, and that feeling of being fundamentally flawed or weak-willed when you fail to control yourself again.
okay, that makes a lot of sense. And this realization about hidden forces is also linked to a specific frustration the author apparently experienced, one that I think resonates with a lot of people who've maybe dipped their toes into mindfulness or meditation.
Oh, yeah.
That frustration being, why does it often feel so confusing? Why is it so hard?
Yes. The book speaks directly to that experience of trying to meditate or just trying to be more mindful in daily life and feeling like you're just not getting it.
Right. You read the books, they give instructions, sit down, follow your breath, or just observe your thoughts. Sounds simple enough.
It sounds simple, but the book highlights the common reality. You sit down and your mind is just a chaotic whirlwind. Thoughts, anxieties, plans, memories, all churning.
Total chaos.
You try to focus on the breath for maybe half a second, and then boom, you're swept away for 5 minutes planning dinner or reliving some awkward conversation from yesterday.
Absolutely. It's not like the mind just quietly presents thoughts one by one for calm observation. It feels more like being caught in a stampede, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A stampede is a great way to put it. And the standard advice, well, probably well-meaning, can feel utterly useless in that moment. Just observe your thoughts. How do you observe a raging river when you're stuck in the middle of the current?
Or let go of attachment. How?
How? It feels impossible when a thought or feeling has such a powerful, visceral grip on you. The book points out that the crucial how is often missing from traditional explanations.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so hard? Why does the mind seem to have, well, a mind of its own sometimes?
And the book's answer to this why it's so hard question connects directly back to those hidden forces we were just talking about.
It does. The revelation presented in the book is that the reason mindfulness or meditation can feel so confusing and difficult is that you're basically attempting to navigate a really complex inner system without understanding the fundamental players involved.
Okay.
The book states there are three distinct forces operating within your mind. Each one has its own nature, its own agenda, its own way of influencing you.
Three distinct forces. Okay, let's spend a little more time with this. This sounds really central. What are these forces, generally speaking? What do they want?
Okay, so according to the book, you can think of them as fundamental energies or maybe patterns of being that can dominate your inner landscape at different times. One force is oriented towards clarity, towards peace, towards wisdom.
Okay, the good one, maybe?
Well, it's the part of you that longs for understanding, that seeks genuine connection, that kind of inherently knows what's truly important. When this force is dominant, the book says you feel calm, aware, centered. Things feel clear.
That sounds like the state we'd all prefer to be in most of the time. What about the second force?
The second one is quite different. This force apparently thrives on chaos, on reaction, conflict, and suffering. Its agenda is to create disturbance,
Disturbance.
to pull you into drama, anger, fear, self-pity. It's the impulse behind destructive behavior, the internal voice that fuels blame and resentment. When this force is dominant, your mind feels agitated, noisy, critical, reactive. It actually feeds on negativity and finds ways to justify it, according to the book.
Right, we've all felt that kind of agitated energy that just wants to lash out or wallow.
Mm.
Okay, so one wants peace, the other thrives on chaos. What about the third force?
The third force is perhaps less dramatic than the second one, less obviously destructive maybe. But the book says it's just as potent in its effect on keeping you from clarity. Its agenda is more about stagnation, comfort, and a kind of passive unawareness.
Passive unawareness, like zoning out.
Kind of. It wants you to drift through life, half asleep, numb, distracted, avoiding anything that requires effort or change or genuine presence. When this force is dominant, you feel lethargic, dull, easily bored, prone to distraction, and resistant to any kind of conscious effort or looking within.
Okay, so these three distinct energies or patterns, clarity peace, chaos reaction, and drift numbness, each with its own motivation, are all vying for influence inside us all the time.
Exactly. And the book states very clearly that they take turns. They rise and fall in influence depending on various conditions, internal and external. They affect what thoughts seem loudest in your head, what emotions feel most compelling, what impulses feel like your genuine desires at that moment.
And the core problem, the source of the confusion, and the why did I do that moment.
Is that you've been mistaking their voices, their agendas, for your own authentic self. You identify with whatever force happens to be strongest in that moment without realizing it's just one part of the system, and crucially, not even your fundamental nature.
Wow. That's a really powerful reframing. So it's not that I am inherently chaotic or lazy or whatever.
Right.
It's that I'm identifying with a force that is, and I don't know how to tell the difference or create any kind of distance from it.
Precisely. The book suggests you're navigating your inner world without a map, without understanding the different currents and tides pulling you in various directions.
Yeah.
You're trying to steer the boat, but you don't realize there are these powerful, unseen forces beneath the water pushing you around.
Okay, so if that's the problem, these hidden forces taking over and us mistaking them for ourselves, what's the solution the book offers? How do we actually get that map? How do we learn to see these forces?
This is where the core concept, the sort of lost art mentioned in the title, is introduced. Gaam-Node Ru.
Gaam-Node Ru.
Gaam-Node Ru.
Yeah.
The book defines it as the art of setting the condition to know what's actually happening in your mind without getting swept away by it.
Setting the condition to know. That phrase itself feels important. It sounds like it's about creating a specific environment or a specific state inside yourself where clarity becomes possible rather than just, trying harder to be aware or forcing something.
That's the key distinction the book really emphasizes. It's not about forcing yourself to be mindful through sheer willpower or trying to suppress thoughts or wrestling with these forces head on. It's about skillfully creating the conditions necessary for clear knowing, for clear perception to arise naturally.
Like adjusting the focus on a camera lens.
That's a great analogy. You're not changing the scene itself, at least not initially. You're changing your ability to see it clearly. And the book emphasizes that Gaam-Node Ru is a skill.
A skill. Okay, not just a meditation technique you do once a day, not a set of beliefs you adopt, but something you actually train yourself to do, like learning an instrument.
Yes, exactly like that. It's presented not as another book of abstract theories or complicated esoteric techniques that might require years of dedicated retreat or specific, maybe difficult physical postures. It's framed as a practical, learnable skill.
And a crucial aspect the book highlights is that it's a skill you can start practicing immediately in your everyday life.
That's right. That's a big part of its promise. The book stresses its accessibility. You don't need a special cushion necessarily, or a silent retreat, or hours of free time you might not have. The practice of Gaam-Node Ru is about bringing a specific kind of awareness, this knowing, to your inner experience as it is happening.
So right in the middle of things.
Right in the middle of things, no matter where you are or what you're doing. And the book offers a pretty compelling promise related to this practice. Even practicing the very first stage of Gaam-Node Ru, just beginning to learn how to set the condition for knowing, is apparently enough to get a taste of real freedom.
Tasting real freedom from just the first stage. That sounds, well, almost too good to be true, doesn't it? What kind of shift does the book say happens as you practice this skill?
It describes a significant, palpable transformation that unfolds naturally, not through force, but through this developing skill of seeing. First, the grip of confusion begins to loosen.
Oh.
Because you're learning to see these forces, these energies, these patterns. When they arise, you start to recognize them. And because you can recognize them, you're no longer completely automatically identified with them. This creates space, inner space.
Okay, space between me and the force that's active.
Exactly. And in that space, the book says, you begin to see something profound. That beneath the constantly shifting landscape of thoughts, emotions, and urges driven by these forces, your real nature, the core you, is already calm, stable, and whole.
So it's not about striving to achieve calmness or wholeness. It's about recognizing that it's already there, just obscured.
Precisely. The book states quite clearly that there's nothing fundamentally broken or damaged about your core self. There's nothing to fix. The work, the art, is simply to learn to see this underlying stable nature, which is often obscured by the noisy activity of the three forces. It's like the sun, it's always present, even when it's hidden behind the clouds. Gaam-Node Ru is the skill of learning to see through those clouds.
That sounds less like self-improvement and more like self-discovery, uncovering what's already present.
It really is framed that way. The book describes it almost like a deep inner therapy that you perform on yourself. Not by analyzing your past endlessly, but by seeing your present inner reality with clarity. By learning to distinguish the voices of the forces from your own natural state, you begin to answer your own fundamental questions about why you act the way you do.
And that lifts that weight.
It starts to lift that unseen weight. You didn't even fully realize you were carrying the burden of being constantly driven and confused by these unknown inner forces.
So, who is this book for then? Is it aimed at people already on a specific spiritual path or folks with years of meditation experience?
The book is very clear on this point. It states emphatically that it is for anyone who is willing to look honestly at their inner experience. Full stop.
Regardless of background.
Regardless of background beliefs, whether you've ever sat on a meditation cushion or not. The principles the book explores the idea of these inner forces, the capacity to know them directly, apparently speak to universal human qualities. The book says they belong to no one, meaning they aren't tied to any specific dogma or tradition, yet they are for everyone, accessible to any human being willing to look.
And does the book make grand, maybe unbelievable claims about, say, instant enlightenment or anything like that?
No, it explicitly avoids that. The preface states there are no grand promises, no mystical claims about achieving some ultimate state overnight. Instead, it offers clear explanations of how the mind actually works from this perspective of the three forces and provides practical, step-by-step instructions for practicing Gaam-Node Ru.
Instructions that are designed to make sense.
Designed to make intuitive sense once you start to see what's actually happening inside you. It's very grounded in that way.
So you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to get it right away, just willing to engage with this idea.
Exactly. The only prerequisite, according to the book, is that quiet courage to be willing to see what's really going on inside you without layering on more judgment. To acknowledge that perhaps you're not as totally in control as you thought, especially those tough moments, and to be curious about what is driving you.
Curiosity instead of self-blame.
Precisely. The book invites you to start right there, with your current experience, not with more confusing theories, but with clarity and a skill set you can immediately begin to develop.
This foundation in the preface really sets up the problem beautifully. The unseen drivers, the confusion, the frustration with trying to change behavior or practice mindfulness without understanding the underlying system. And it introduces Gaam-Node Ru as the core solution, the skill of knowing.
It creates the necessary context, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It explains why that question, why did I do that, is so persistent and frustrating. Because it's focusing on the symptom, the action, rather than the root cause, which the book says is the unseen influence.
Which brings us perfectly into chapter 1. The title alone is so relatable. I did it again.
Right. It immediately grounds everything we just discussed in that incredibly familiar, often painful moment of regret.
It does. The book opens chapter 1 by painting this really vivid, almost visceral picture. It's that moment where you didn't plan it, you didn't intend to hurt anyone or make things worse, but something just came out.
Like a heat-seeking missile, the book says.
Yeah. That phrasing is so accurate, sharp, unnecessary, perfectly targeted to sting.
And you see the impact immediately, don't you? The other person's expression changes, their energy shifts, maybe their eyes go distant, the light just drains from their face. It's awful to witness.
That image of the heat-seeking missile comment, it just feels so automatic, so out of your control in that split second.
Yes. It perfectly captures that feeling of being hijacked. The book emphasizes that in that moment, something cracks inside your heart too. Because you know immediately that wasn't the real you. That wasn't what you wanted to happen. It wasn't supposed to go that way.
You got pulled in, swept away, hijacked. Maybe it happens when you're tired or stressed or feel triggered somehow.
But it happens. And then that familiar tide of regret just washes over you. Oh no, I did it again.
And this is where the question, why did I do that, inevitably resurfaces louder than ever. But the book immediately challenges this question as the starting point, doesn't it?
It's a crucial pivot point in the chapter.
Yeah.
The book argues that asking, why did I do that, is asking the question too late. It's focusing on the aftermath, on the consequence.
Like asking why the building is on fire after it's already engulfed in flames.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
The truly important question, the one that actually leads to understanding and maybe change, is what happened before that? What was the sequence of events inside you, just moments, maybe even milliseconds, before the regrettable action?
So if you could rewind the tape of your inner experience and watch it in super slow motion.
You'd see something move first. An impulse, a feeling, a thought, a sensation. Something shifted inside.
Something moved first, something persuasive maybe, arose inside you, and you followed it. That's the critical insight chapter 1 starts with.
Yes. And the book challenges the common assumption that in those reactive moments, you are making a conscious, reasoned choice based purely on your character or your beliefs.
Which we like to think we are.
We do. And while character and beliefs are obviously important over the long term, the book suggests the truth is deeper in that split-second reaction. You weren't really deciding. You were reacting to something already at work inside you, a wave that was already cresting.
And this something, this wave, isn't just random, is it? Chapter 1 describes it as precise, conditioned, and familiar.
Yes, that's the chilling part, but also the hopeful part in a way. It's precise because it often targets your specific vulnerabilities or triggers. It's conditioned because it's based on old patterns, past experiences, learned responses that are basically stored in your system.
Like muscle memory, but emotional.
Kind of, yeah. And it's familiar because it shows up again and again in similar situations, often with the same flavor. Maybe it's always anger that hijacks you, or defensiveness, or withdrawal, or a specific craving that pops up under stress. The book likens it to a hidden program running in the background of your operating system.
A hidden program. And you didn't choose to install this program, did you? But it's running its course through you.
That's the core of the hijack in action, as the book describes it. You didn't consciously select run the critical comment program or run the give into craving program. It initiated automatically based on the internal state and maybe an external trigger, and it ran its course through your mind and body, resulting in the action. You were the vehicle, not the driver in that moment.
And this realization, this feeling of being run by something you didn't choose, particularly when you know you should be acting differently, that leads to a specific and really deep kind of suffering, doesn't it?
The book talks about layers of suffering here. There's the basic suffering that comes from the regrettable action itself and its immediate consequences, hurting someone, feeling ashamed.
Right.
But there's a deeper, more frustrating kind that arises when you do have some self-awareness. Maybe you've tried to change before, you understand intellectually why you shouldn't do that thing, but you still do it anyway.
That's the worst feeling.
That's where the profound and demoralizing feeling of powerlessness sets in. You feel like you're fighting against yourself and losing, even though you consciously know better and want to do better.
And this feeling of powerlessness, the inability to stop yourself even when you desperately want to, is why, according to the book, most standard advice often just falls short or completely fails in those high-pressure reactive moments.
Exactly. The book points out that advice like just breathe, count to 10, think positive thoughts, or just walk away are often given as solutions. And look, they might work sometimes in moments of relatively low intensity or if your mind happens to be somewhat settled already.
But when you're really triggered,
When you're really triggered, when that hijack program is running full steam, the book argues they often don't address the underlying issue, which is the mind's state when it's being hijacked. If the internal system is already in chaos, simply telling yourself to breathe calmly or think happy thoughts is like trying to reason with a tornado.
it doesn't get to the root cause.
It doesn't get to the root cause of the internal disturbance, the inner weather pattern that led to the hijack in the first place.
So what does the book offer instead of focusing just on these surface-level techniques? It introduces this powerful analogy for the mind, not as some abstract concept, but as a living system.
Yes, this analogy is really central to Chapter 1's explanation of how the hijack actually works. The book describes the mind as a living, responsive system, constantly charged and reacting to internal and external stimuli. Think of it like an ecosystem.
Okay, a living system. And it explains what happens when something toxic enters this system.
Right. And by toxic, the book means things like intense fear, blame, shame, guilt, resentment, these powerful negative energies or emotional states.
And when these enter the system,
They don't just sit there politely waiting to be processed.
mm-hmm.
The book says they shake the system profoundly.
Shake the system. What does that feel like internally? Is it just a metaphor or is it more literal?
The book describes it as very real, not just metaphorical. It triggers a cascade of physiological and psychological events. Your stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol surge, flooding your system. Your emotional circuits become overloaded, buzzing with noise.
Noise.
Like racing thoughts, intense physical sensations of tension or heat or tightness, a feeling of being overwhelmed, agitated, maybe even panicky. The entire internal system goes into a state of high alert and disarray. It's literally shaken up.
And the direct result of this inner shaking and flooding isn't calm, clear thinking.
Definitely not.
Mm-hmm.
The direct result is a hijack. Wisdom goes offline. Nuance disappears.
So when you're in that state of inner shaking, it's Genuinely not you making the decision, the calm, rational you.
According to the book, no. In that moment, when the system is profoundly shaken, it's not your wise, clear self leading the way. It's chemistry driving the bus, the surge of hormones. It's old conditioned patterns firing automatically like a tripped wire. It's basically a short circuit in clarity and conscious awareness.
And the painful part is you often only realize it after the fact.
Exactly. After the words are out, after the action is taken. By the time your conscious, rational mind catches up and says, whoa, what just happened? The damage might already be done. In that instant, you feel like you're making a choice. It feels like I am saying this. But the book argues you're simply reacting to the powerful tremors and the overwhelming noise within that shaken system.
The book really emphasizes that this inner shaking is real, chemical, electrical, emotional. It's a tangible internal state, not just a bad mood.
It is. And the book delivers a crucial warning based on this. If this internal system remains in a state of chronic or easily triggered shaking, if you're easily thrown off balance internally, you will keep getting pulled into the same reactive loops. The same regrettable actions will keep happening,
Regardless of your intentions.
regardless of how sincere your intentions are to change. Your desire for a different outcome, your intellectual understanding of what you should do, is often simply no match for the powerful, agitated state of a shaken internal system. The book uses an analogy like trying to hold your hand steady enough for delicate surgery while your whole body is trembling uncontrollably. It's just not possible.
Okay, that paints a bleak picture if you feel stuck in those patterns. But chapter 1 doesn't just leave you there feeling powerless, does it? It offers a key insight, a path out.
Right. This is the moment of hope in chapter 1. The core insight presented is kind of counterintuitive, but really powerful. If the mind can stop shaking even for just a moment, something extraordinary happens.
What happens?
The internal chaos, the buzzing noise, the racing thoughts, they don't necessarily disappear instantly or entirely, but they begin to organize themselves. The intensity lessens.
Like that classic analogy of a snow globe after it's been violently shaken. Eventually, if you hold it still, the flakes begin to settle down.
Exactly. The book uses that kind of imagery. When the shaking stops, the system begins to clear. The mud settles at the bottom of the pond, allowing the water to become clear again.
And as it settles, the mind begins to return
To its natural, fundamental rhythm.
Yeah.
And what is that natural state? The book describes it as alert, balanced, present, and capable of clarity and wise decision-making. The very opposite of the hijacked reactive state. It's your baseline, always there underneath the turbulence.
And this moment of the system settling, this ability to somehow stop the shaking, is presented as the doorway out of the cycle.
Yes, the book frames this moment of truth. The ability to perceive what's happening inside you, to see the shaking, to see the influence of the forces, without getting instantly swept away into the drama and reaction. That ability is the critical doorway. It's the pivot point.
Because the moment you can truly admit to yourself that something unseen, something beyond your conscious intention is influencing you in those difficult moments.
You're no longer denying the reality of your inner landscape. You're not fighting it blindly anymore. You're beginning to see it. And this is where the power dynamic shifts significantly.
How so?
The book gives this powerful assurance. When you can see something clearly, really see it for what it is, without adding stories or judgment, you are no longer simply its victim. You gain the capacity to relate to it differently. You're not trying to fight an unknown enemy in the dark. You're starting to understand the dynamics of your own system.
And this connects back directly to Gaam-Node Ru from the preface, setting the condition to know. That's the skill for doing this seeing.
Precisely. Gaam-Node Ru is presented as the skill that enables this seeing, this setting the condition to know. It's how you learn to perceive the shaking, the forces, the patterns, without being immediately consumed by them.
And the book promises that it won't just offer general advice or inspiration that kind of evaporates when you're under pressure.
Right. Instead, it promises to give you the wiring diagram.
The wiring diagram. I like that practical image, not just philosophy.
It's presented as the map of your inner system. The way to truly know what's moving in your system, why it's shaking, and crucially, how to create the conditions for it to settle down. It's not about figuring out why you're fundamentally flawed, but understanding the mechanics of how your mind and emotions are currently operating.
So for anyone listening who's ever sighed or yelled internally, why do I keep doing that? Chapter 1 really drives home the book's core argument. It's not necessarily a fundamental character defect, but often the result of these hidden forces hijacking an internal system that's been thrown into a state of shaking by, well, toxic input and old conditioned patterns.
And the invitation throughout the chapter is to shift your focus. Stop beating yourself up endlessly for the outcome, the regrettable action, and start becoming intensely curious about what happened in the moments, even the milliseconds, before that action.
Slow it down, trace it back.
Exactly. Trace it back and find out what was truly driving you by starting to understand the state of your internal system in that moment. What force was active? How shaken was the system?
This foundational understanding from the preface in Chapter 1 is incredibly powerful, isn't it? Because it completely reframes the problem of our inconsistent, often regretted behavior. It moves it away from being a moral failing or just a weakness of
It
will.
being more about a lack of inner knowledge and a lack of skill in navigating a complex, inherently reactive internal system.
And it introduces Gaam-Node Ru as the key skill to gain that knowledge, that clarity, to see the unseen forces, and crucially, to learn how to allow the inner system to settle.
It provides a completely different lens through which to view our inner struggles. It suggests the path to greater freedom and more consistently. Wise action isn't necessarily through more effort, more gritting your teeth to control yourself,
But through
but through developing a specific kind of understanding and skillfulness in perceiving what is actually happening inside you moment by moment.
it leaves you with a fundamental question to ponder then. If our own conscious intentions, the part of us that knows better, aren't always the true driver of our actions, especially in those moments we most regret, what does that really mean for our traditional sense of control?
Yeah, it challenges that idea significantly.
And what immense possibilities might open up when we shift our focus from trying to force behavior change through willpower alone to simply learning to see the forces that have been steering us and the state of the internal system they operate within.
It completely shifts the paradigm of inner work, doesn't it? From feeling like a constant battle to be won through sheer force, to seeing it more as an inner landscape to be understood through perception and skill.
A kind of knowing that Gaam-Node Ru, setting the condition to know, promises to unlock.
Yes, it suggests that the real power isn't in fighting the internal weather, but in learning how to perceive it clearly, and therefore navigate through it much more skillfully, maybe even peacefully.
That's a lot to think about, and it really feels like we've only just peeked behind the curtain here. We've just scratched the surface today, covering the preface in Chapter 1 of The Buddha's Lost Art of Gaam-Node Ru and the Three Natures.
And these initial sections truly lay the essential groundwork, don't they? They define the core problem, that feeling of being hijacked by unseen drivers, the subsequent suffering and confusion, and introduce the fundamental approach offered by the book. Gaam-Node Ru, the skill of gaining clarity on our inner state, the state of that living, sometimes shaking, system.
There is so much more in the book to explore, clearly. The nature of the three natures themselves, peace, chaos, drift in much greater detail. What do they actually feel like? How do you recognize them?
And the actual step-by-step practice of Gaam-Node Ru itself. How do you do it? How do you set the condition to know?
And how to specifically identify and work with what the book calls mental toxins, those inputs like fear and blame that shake the system. Plus, how learning to settle the system and see clearly fundamentally shapes not just our moments of reaction, but our lives and our future actions.
Absolutely. We'll definitely dive into those topics in future deep dives. The foundation has been laid with this introduction to the problem and the core solution concept.
So the invitation now, perhaps, for you listening,
Is maybe just to begin noticing those moments of regret in your own life, those I did it again moments, with a little less self-blame and a little more curiosity. Perhaps for the first time, become curious about the feeling or impulse or thought that came just before the action.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We've unpacked the initial foundational layers of this fascinating book. As you go about your week, maybe just think about those moments you wish you could rewind.
And just entertain the possibility, as the book suggests, that something unseen, something distinct from your core self, was at work. Ponder the idea of your mind as that living system that gets shaken by certain inputs.
And consider the potential freedom that might come not from fighting harder, but from learning how to allow that system to settle, how to see more clearly.
What might be revealed? What possibilities might open up when you stop focusing solely on the outcome, the regrettable action, and start paying gentle, curious attention to what happened just before, inside your own system?
Until our next deep dive, keep exploring that question, but maybe with this new lens the book offers. What happened just before I did that? What was the state of my system?